thank you for coming.
Excited.
Yes. I've met you through the Longmont Chamber of Commerce, and through your work as a gym coach and doing a whole bunch of other great work in the town, and then you came over and checked out what I was doing at the time, which was working here at Longmont Public Media, and we got to talking, and I found out that you had an incredibly interesting story,
Yeah.
and that's why I invited you here today to tell that story. So, do you want to tell that story?
Yeah. I wanna go over some background to kind of because there's kind of two stories that are entangling as I go through the system of HISD district, which is Houston, Texas. And I want to also say is I hope that this story touches one person at least that maybe has experienced this kind of childhood and kind of understand that this is not you're not alone, because I met so many girls that I thought that my story was hard, but theirs was 5 times, thousands times harder. So let's start with kind of a background to give you some kind of understanding. My grandmother started selling cocaine in like her 40s. She just decided that's where the route she wanted to take. As my mom grew, she in turn got addicted to that cocaine and ended up selling to an undercover officer. And my grandmother had already went to prison once. So when my mom did that, they both got in trouble. My grandmother went to prison and my mom stayed out on probation. When that happened, she got 20 years. So sorry, that didn't happen yet. So she got off on probation. She got in a fight with my second cousin, her cousin, and she was, can I cuss?
Oh, absolutely.
Perfect. She was faking her piss test. So my cousin calls the PO and says, hey, she's faking her piss test, piss her again. And she gets her sentence of 20 years and goes, and I'm born at this point. She goes back in when I was 3. From 3 to 7, I was kind of passed around through my family members, and the one thing my dad did for me was take me to see her once a month, a 6-hour drive. I don't even remember where it was at yet, but that's one fond memory that I have. So fast forward, she gets out, and we're supposed to just be a happy family again, but my dad has been a user forever, so he, as you can imagine, she gets out, she's on parole. She still has a good 12 years left on parole, and my dad is using in front of her, so fights happen, and my dad's from Mexico City, so he's always been pretty violent with women especially, and he kicks us out. So I'm now like 8, and my mom is homeless, and the only option she has is to be a call girl. And so that worked out great. We got like an apartment, we got a house, things were going good. And then she meets a man who is on the verge of leaving his wife and, hires her. He ends up getting caught. He ends up living with us, but he is a big CEO of this oil company. So my life changes in like 6 months. We go from like this house that she has like fought to have to having a lot of money with this man who has now we took him in, but he has now taken us in, bought us a house, new cars, all the things. Well, during this whole stint, my mom's still on parole. She decides to build a marijuana factory of 500 plants. We're in Texas, like in the 2000s, so like highly illegal, and she's on parole still. So we start. She tells him not to get involved, but he does. Unfortunately, he puts his name on the bills. We're having a great time. We have a barn, we have horses, we have a bunch of weed, we have like everything life wants to give us. Like everything was great. Well, my stepdad decides to tell his son, who is my stepbrother, and my stepbrother has an uncle who's a cop, so he goes and tells the cop. They start a 6-month investigation on my mom. I am like 11 at this point, and she also gets a DWI in the middle of all this. So we have 2 charges pending. I am now going into adolescence of 12, and I'm really lost at this point. Like, I've been passed around through family member to family member. My mom gets out. We have like a good 2 weeks with my father, and then things go to shit again. And then I have this new stepdad in my life who has now just changed our life completely. And like, I'm like 12 years on this earth trying to figure out where I'm placed, trying to figure out my safety. And there was just nowhere safe at that point. So I meet a boy, and of course, we all start with meeting a boy, and he is heavy into drugs, and he offers me my first Xanax bar at 12, and he gives me 2 that night. I lose my virginity. I don't remember, and I wake up outside on the grass. So things start to shift. I'm trying to find love in all the wrong places. My mom is pending 2 charges. I don't know what's going on. And I'm just lost. And so you would think that that was enough consequences for me that night to be like, never will I do that again. But it started a 15-year addiction of Xanax. And Xanax has always been my drug of choice. I did a lot of drugs, and those memories are very like fuzzy. I remember the really emotional parts, and that was one of them. And so it was the best feeling I've ever felt, and that's why it's so fucking dangerous for people to be on Xanax if they're suffering, because especially at that age, I was just like, I found some safety. So then fast forward, my boyfriend at that point goes and robs the liquor store outside my house and the convenience store, and then comes back and chills at my house and gets arrested, and he's gone for 17 years. So he just got out a few years ago. But, you know, if I think back about this and I think about like where my emotions were at, you know, my dad has left me, my mom's left me, now my boyfriend that I loved, you know, quotation marks, has left me. So again, searching for love in all the wrong places. And I end up going to JCPenney's with my dad's girlfriend, and we both are stealing, and we didn't know, and we get arrested. A few weeks earlier, I'm like hardcore into Xanax at this point. Like that happened very fast. Like in a matter of a month, I was taking 2 to 3 a day. Everybody knew everything. Like everybody around me was all dealing with their own shit. So it was just kind of like me, just my coping mechanism through life. So a few weeks earlier, I run away to my grandmother's house, and I used to just speak so highly of her, but as I got older and had children, I understand like the poison that she was in my life. She encouraged my pill use. We traded pills. We got high together. By 13, I was getting high with my dad and my grandmother. It was a lot of pills and smoking weed, but like a lot of Xanax, a lot of Adderall. So my mom calls me out as a runaway like a few weeks earlier, but I get back home, everything's fine, and then this arrest happens. So my first charge was shoplifting, and as a runaway, they took me in to HISD. So all is well. I get out. I'm on probation. My mom gets married. The next day, they come and take her in. And they tell me, and now I have a new stepdad. I'm living in this big house. It just happened. You know, everything was so fast, and now my mom's gone again. And so it's supposed to be a weekend, which then turns into 2.5 years. So she never gets out. In that moment, they're on the news. So their huge marijuana operation, 491 plants. My teachers are telling me they saw my mom on the news. I'm like so bad in my addiction, like in such a short time, that everything's just spiraling. And the only thing that was stopping me from really going crazy was my mom being there, telling me, you know, to get my shit together, but also dealing with her own shit. So when she left, there was just no supervision. My stepdad had no legal custody of me, so she got arrested on a Friday. By Monday, I got my stuff and I went back to my dad's. I lasted there for a very short time. So I'm from Houston, and I was zoned to Lee High School, and Lee's condemned now, but this is when Katrina happened. So all of the blacks came to a Mexican high school, and it was a race war. So when I got there, it was drive-bys, it was fucking wild. I've never in my life seen something like I have. Like that school, we got rap battles going on at lunch. I'm snorting cocaine in the back, and at the apartments, I'm coming back in class. Nobody gives a shit. It's just like the teachers can't even handle this. So it's just like a big party. And that expanded this huge network of people that gave me drugs and like places to stay. So I'm still living with my dad at this point, but that's really bad. He doesn't want me to be there, obviously. It lasted for like a week where we were good. And then it was going to shit. But my grandmother stayed on the couch with my uncle in my uncle's apartment down the street and said, hey, come sleep on our other couch. Like, why don't you come on over? And so during all this, a girl that I met in like back in Sugarland. So Sugarland's like more of a nice area. That's where my mom and stepdad lived. Also had her mom's work near Lee High School, and she was spiraling. Like, she was already deep into drugs. She was in treatment homes 3 times by the time I met her. So like me and her together was kind of an explosion. So she convinces her mom to zone her to my school, which was just us doing a shit ton of cocaine every day. And I'm on probation. I'm faking my piss test, taught by my lovely family on how to do. And so everything's okay. But one night we're in some apartment in Southwest Houston, and she goes, I don't want to go home. And I'm like, I don't want to go home. So guess what? Like, we don't go home for several months. And so I run away again. My dad calls me like 3 times and then just stops. And then my phone ends up getting disconnected. I keep in contact with my grandmother. So somebody knows where I'm at. Nobody seems to really like give a shit if I come back or not. And so on her end, she wanted to escape because she had like issues at her home. But it was people cared about her, and they kept trying to get her in treatment home. But on my end, nobody really cared if like I came back or not. So we end up meeting, we go from house to house. We sleep outside some days. I'm still 13. We end up meeting a guy with his friends, and he was heavily addicted to Xanax. I was heavily addicted to Xanax. It was like a perfect match, and he's 24, and I was now 14. I had recently turned 14, and he moves me into his home, and I stay there for like a good 5 months, and we're living like this happy life. Like, things were getting really dark. His family was questioning how old I was. I lied about my age. So things were like going to an end. I've already violated probation at this point. When I go home, I'm gonna face another court date. And so I was just enjoying life as it is. I wore the same clothes for months and months. I washed my panties in the sink, and eventually his family told me one day, she goes, Victoria, you have all these knots in your hair. It was like a rat's nest from sleeping, like just not having a brush or anything to take care of myself. Let Johnny, which is his name, like brush them out. And so it took him 6 hours to get the knots out of my hair. And she finally said, like, I don't believe you. I don't believe how old you are. Like, where's your family? You need to go home. I'm scared for my son. I don't know how old you are. I don't want him to be charged with anything. Bless his heart, he passed away a few years later, but he was getting really bad in his addiction where he was having seizures. So she was just really worried about him. Obviously, I was helping that addiction. So I called my grandmother to go home. She came and picked me up, and I was back on the couch of the apartment. We were feeding each other's addiction. She was addicted to pills. I was addicted to pills. It was like there was nowhere to really go except my stepdad, honestly, to have some safety. But in that moment in time, why would I go back to that lifestyle or whichever? I didn't really feel like I had a connection with him. So I just kept on going. So I got another charge for, so I had to face the music, and I somehow in between this got arrested again. And it was a great day. I went on the city bus, and I got a pocket full of Xanax, and I was like, I'm going to go get some triple C's, which is this cough medicine that you get fucked up on if you take enough. And I got caught stealing the triple C's. So I was like, motherfucker. So I got back, I faced the music. They put me on intensive supervision probation. But because I had no ride to the meeting in Northside Houston, I was in Southwest, I took the city bus. But the city bus took too long. So by the time I got to the meeting, it was over. And so the probation officer, like, couldn't really fuck with me. Like, She could. She was about to. But at that moment, she was kind of letting me slide because she was like, I understand no adult in your house will help you. And I don't know what to do. So I ended up getting arrested for that shoplifting. And then I lie about my age and my name. And then I make the cops take me to the adult jail. And then they realize I'm 14 and I have to go back to juvenile. And they're pissed. So I get in front of the judge and he says, if you come back again, you're going to TYC. And so I said, okay, cool. So I left, and maybe like a week, the girl that I used to hang out with and like we first like ran away together calls me and says, I just got out of treatment home. I met this guy and he's getting an apartment. Do you want to move with us? And I was like, fuck yeah, of course I want to move with you. So fuck probation once again. And I get all my shit out of the apartment and I leave. This time nobody's called me. Nobody like they're done. Like no, I'm causing all this chaos. Like it's my choice at the end of the day. I'm choosing to leave repeatedly over and over and over again. So this is where things like get kind of dark. We move into this apartment. I'm 14 at the time, and we're with two guys and me and her. And me and her are just, we don't really have a plan, basically. So we start selling drugs. That was a plan, to sell dope for them. But we didn't realize, like, we thought we were going to have all this money. We had to give them the money. So we would go days without eating. We were just getting fed with, like, cocaine and ecstasy and Xanax. And as long as I had that, like, things were great. So we continued to do that, and then we went to a stripper club one night, and it's like a hole in the wall, the north side of Houston, and the owner asked us if we want to work there. And of course, like, we're starving. And so we go to Mr. ID, which is this ID place that is no longer here, and we get a fake ID, which it says on the back, like, this is fake, but you can just wipe that off with nail polish remover. So we go and get these IDs. We go and become strippers at this bar, and then somehow I get in contact with the girl I met in juvenile who's 17, who's pure fucking evil, just dangerous as fuck. Like, I admired her for being so, like, she would just fight for no reason. She would hurt people for no reason, and I always had emotion attached to my decisions. And I always felt like something was wrong with me, that, like, I cared. And I respected that she didn't give a shit. And I needed somebody next to me to not give a shit, because I was 14 and I was on the streets. And so I told her, like an idiot, like, hey, this is where I am. Come through. Well, the bitch moved in. So now we have a 14-year-old, a 15-year-old, a 17-year-old, and we're stripping at the strip club. All at the same club. Well, dynamics start to shift, and like I really debated adding this part in, but I'm just gonna be real. We were on a lot of drugs, and me and my friend and her boyfriend all had sexual relations. And when that high ended, I did not stop having sexual relations with this man. Okay, so we can understand how the anger starts to happen. We're all in this apartment, we're fucking hungry, and we have no control over anything. So one night we get in a fight, and it was like simmering, and they tell me to get out of the car, and they're like being really nice, and they jump me and they jack me for the money that I had. It was like $70 that night, and I was in 3rd Ward in Houston, and it's like pretty dangerous neighborhood, especially if you look like me. And I just got jumped in a ditch, and they left. They drove away. So I like that emotion is something I never, ever, ever want to go back to. That feeling of being completely lost in the world. And I'll never forget this memory. I look to my left. It is pitch black dark. It's an alley. I look to my right. We're right by like a gas station, so it's a main road. And I think if I start walking and a cop comes, I'm going to get arrested. But that was better than going in this dark ass alley. So I started walking the streets, and this guy pulled up and said, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "No, I just got jumped and jacked. Can you take me back to the apartment where the girls are?" Like a fucking retard. I'm sorry to use that word. I didn't mean to use that word, but like, what the fuck was I thinking now that I look back on that? I don't know. So I get in his car. I tell him where I live. I'm like down there on Victory, right by Third Ward. And I get there before they do. So I approach the guy that I was having those relationships with first before they got there. And I tell him what happened, and he was like, "Don't worry, I'll protect you." And she comes in, and she's like, "Guess what the fuck I just did?" And she was like, "What the fuck are you doing here?" So we go at it again. We fight again. I go outside. Now I'm facing the other two girls. There's a third girl, and I don't know where she came from or how she got there, but she was there. I think we picked her up that night from the club, and she helped jump me. So at this point, I'm literally dead inside. There's nothing you can take from me. You've already beat my ass, all three of you. Let's just go again. And what was I thinking? I don't know. You know, it's funny how the ego works, because at that point, it just destroyed my ego, and I needed to find my redemption. So one of the girls, who's the girl that I brought in from juvenile, said, "She's going to hurt you really bad. We need to go." She just jumped me like 10 minutes before that. So why would I trust her? I don't know. I slept outside that night, and in the morning, we left, me and her. And we continued to rob men. We would meet them and rob them and meet them and rob them for the next few weeks. And time is very fuzzy. And then we meet a guy with a car, and we steal his car. And so we drive around or whichever, and then we end up at her friend's house, who is 16, living with a 39-year-old man who is beating the fuck out of her every single day. My child brain is just in, like, I think I was just in survival this whole, up until like probably 5 years ago, I've been able to just breathe. And so I'm now the burden. We stole this car. We got here. This is her friend. I have nothing to bring to the table. I have no money. Dynamics start to shift again. So things start to go against me. And so it's clear that they want me gone. I don't know where to go. My adult brain now is like, you just had to go back to your stepdad's. That would have been the reason. And that's why I'll never play victim in this. Like, I chose to leave over and over and over again. I chose to be in these situations. I chose to choose drugs every time. Like, that was my only focus for so long. And just to numb myself and to get away, it's the first thing that like I took in my life that took away the pain. And so we go, and okay, so they leave one day, all three of them, and two of them come back. And they say, "The girl from juvenile just got arrested for suspect in murder." Okay. So I'm like in these people's house. He's beating the fuck out of her. He's turning on me, being abusive. I need to go. I said I'm going to leave the next morning. That night, the cops are surrounding the car. There was a for sale sign on the back of that car. And in my head, I thought, what a great gimmick. Like, because I stole it. Like, it's so funny. Like, it's for sale. Nobody would ever think I stole it. Well, they called that number to buy the car. And then the guy was like, "Where is the car? It's stolen." So that's how they found me. And I happily walked out and said, "I stole this car. Please arrest me." And so that was my third charge. That was my felony charge. And I now really had to go face the music. So if I fast forward back right before my mom went to prison the second time, I got expelled from school, and I brought a knife to school. So I got expelled. I got kicked out of the district. I had to go to JJAEP. All that happened in the same time my mom left, and that's when I left. So I never actually fulfilled that sentence. So when I try to go back to, and this is later, but when I tried to go back to Fort Bend, I had to go back to boot camp, even after all of this. So I stole the car, I get arrested, I face the music. I get in front of the judge again, and he says, "I told you, you're going to TYC." And he said, you're leaving at 5 a.m. tomorrow. And that was the point in time that TYC had lawsuits of abuse. Like, the girls were getting raped left and right. Like, the biggest fear from DOs, from juveniles, was going in there at that time. And the DOs that were coming from TY to juvenile was telling us these horrible stories. And they're like, we had to leave. But they also were horrible DOs. They would beat us and abuse us from that experience. So it was like, if this is what I'm dealing with in juvenile, like, what the fuck am I going to deal with in TYC? So I was terrified. And I went back to my cell, and I hadn't talked to my stepdad in like a year and a half. And like, just a perspective of him. So he got married to my mom. He lost his job. He had to pay for her legal fees. He is about to take on my legal fees, and his son was an addict. So there was a moment in time where we were all in jail in the same, like, we're in Harris County. My mom was in jail. His son was in jail. I was in juvenile. And he was just looking around like, what the hell? Like, this man is a saint. I have to say that. And so I called my stepdad and I said, I have not talked to you in forever, and I'm sorry, but I have nowhere else to turn. Can you please get me new lawyers? And 2 women lawyers were at the juvenile that day. I got a new appointed judge the next day, and I got sentenced to group home. Amen. Like, amazing. That would have shifted a lot in my life, I think. And so I go to group home, and I start to just process everything that's just happened. I start to get in the Bible. The one thing that my dad gave me was a very Catholic grandmother who I always taught me right from wrong at a very young age. And I think that's why I struggled so much with these decisions I was making. I knew it was wrong at the end of the day. So I get really deep in the Bible. I'm only focused on like reading. I'm staying out of the drama and group home, which is a whole nother shit show. You know, the staff is letting us fight. We got drugs circling around. The only thing juvenile did for me was literally expand my network of drug users and help me get more drugs. There was no therapy. There's nothing that they do for you other than introduce you to people like you, which then makes things worse. And so when I went to group home, you start, through juvenile and everything, you start to hear these horrible stories. Like, girls are coming in and saying, one girl specifically, I remember the first thing she said to me was, my dad raped me 5 times and I've had 2 miscarriages, with a smile on her face. Like, she was clearly not there. And she had this crazy switch through the day where she would get very violent. And the solution to that was having like 5 women just trample on her and sit there till she calms down. And so it's just like, you know, you think back on all these things, and being a mom now, it's just, we were so traumatized coming from these environments and putting in a caged cell, and then no validation on this is wrong. You shouldn't be abused by your father. You shouldn't be in and out of juvenile. You shouldn't have your parents telling you to go sell drugs outside. Like, all this was so normal in the juvenile system. There was just no help. So when I went to group home, I got out, things were looking up, and then I ended up having to go to boot camp, which then I met my child's father. And I would love to say that the chaos ended, but it continued, and it continued and continued. And I don't think I'm still dealing with the whole like family dynamics and trauma and healing, something that you don't really get away from. You just learn how to cope. And you also learn how to cope without self-sabotaging. But when I got out and went to boot camp, that was really good for me. I think boot camp is actually amazing for any troubled youth. It really teaches you discipline and reward systems in your body and all the things. But I was now stuck with all these traumatic memories, and I've always said I was never raped because I said yes to every single person, but I said yes because I knew that person would give me things. And that's how I kind of went through my life. Like, you know, I have a husband now. I've been married for 5 years, like, very healthy relationship, but there was a lot of healing through that. And there was a lot of association with men and safety when men were not safe, but they were safer than my mom, at that point, because she left me. So they were safer than my grandmother, who keeps feeding me pills. And I found comfort through them, but I also had to grow and understand that I keep self-sabotaging, and I keep self-sabotaging with men who I think are safe, and that was a shift for me. So there's just a lot of feelings, and as an adult, and my mom got arrested after her 20s and went and did that whole system, and she didn't get out of the system until I was 18. You deal with that trauma. And a lot of times people are dealing with childhood trauma, which then leads them into that. But if you start off, I haven't had a year's, sobriety for me wasn't normal until I'm 32, the past 5 years. So when you start off at such a young age with so many drugs in your system, like, how do you go from there? And so I'm going to end the story there. It didn't end, but there was some redemption. And I do truly believe routine is the key. And if you're not busy, then you're going to fail. And that's kind of where I go. But yeah, so that took shorter than I expected. But yeah.
You can find Shakedown merch, graphic novels, and other projects at waywordpress.com. That's WAYWORD press.com. If you would like to support The Shakedown, get exclusive content, and watch episodes live, you can support us at patreon.com/The Shakedown. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment to give Malone that inner peace he so richly deserves.